Hi there. Thank you so much for joining me in today's webinar, part of our summer research series. We're doing a findings recap because all summer long we've been sending out these report PDFs. We wanted to give you an opportunity, if you haven't read those yet, to get a little bit of insight into what we did this year in our summer research. And if you have read the reports, hopefully this brings up some additional great context for you as we close out with our final report on personality and storytelling, which I'll touch on briefly today. So, what is this all about? Who am I? Well, my name is Jared Brickman. I'm the SVP of Research at Carnegie, did my doctoral work at Washington State University, and I have been here for about 8 years. And I've been doing this work as far as kind of research in the national space for several years now. Really, the thing that we try to do all the time is get perceptions of our different audiences and share those out to the industry. So that's what we're doing here. And the summer research series, this is the first year that we ran this more as a research series as opposed to a kind of single research report. So we're very excited about it, and we hope that it's been helpful for all of you who have used this series. For today's presentation, I do want to give you a little bit of background on what it is we did, how we got this research, and who it is we talked to. From there, I also want to talk about the four major reports that we put out during the summer research series. So one of those was about college choice trends. This is kind of I wouldn't call it generic, but it is the one that we have run in the past. Those are the kinds of questions about why do you pick colleges and how do you find information about them. That's something Carnegie has been doing for ages now. The other topics were more kind of things that we felt were really relevant to today's audiences. So, politics and college choice. We ran a study last year that started our kind of research method in understanding those kind of pieces, and we're continuing that work here this year. AI use in the college search, it's the big thing. This is the third time we've run a study with information about AI use in it at the national stage. So we're really excited to see how things have changed over time. And then finally, personality and storytelling. How is it that you can really infuse all of your messages and all of your communication with the right types of personality to get people excited about your institution? So, really excited to talk about that to kind of round out all of our presentation here today. So, the survey background. If you're not aware, Carnegie runs a graduating senior survey every May, so after deadline day, and we hold that with our College Express audiences. So we reach out to them, gift card incentive, to get people to give us feedback about their college search experience, the type of location that they're going to, and all of the different things that really matter to them. What we did that was new in 2025 is we didn't actually just talk to graduating seniors. We also went out to rising students and parents. This helped us gather a larger kind of respondent pool, but also gave us great insights into these other audiences that we think will be really important for you all as you continue to strategize around how you can best serve these folks. As you can see here, more than 3,400 survey responses. Great for our ability to do breakouts. And we split this into reports by specific topics. So that's what we've been putting out through the summer research series. Here I mentioned that those dozens of demographic and institutional breakout tables, those are available for you. And I'll show you some examples of that here today to see what I mean when I'm talking about it. But it's a great opportunity to really drill down into some of the information if you have a specific segmented audience you're thinking about in the traditional undergraduate space. So that's a little bit of background. I did mention that I would talk a little bit about the sample and who took this survey. So here you can see audience type. We have almost half from the graduating seniors pool, but we did get folks from rising students and parent audiences. We have breakouts on things like gender, race, income, political affiliation, respondent religion. And this is the page I kind of wanted to show as well. This is the other way we broke things out, which is really the type of institutional intent. So where are they going? Are these people going to a two-year college? Are they going to a mid-sized public? Are they going to a large private or religious institution? whatever it is, we did breakouts on that because we know that sometimes results and responses differ greatly based on the type of student audience that we're talking to. So if you happen to be a representative of someone who works at a large public four-year institution, you might pay extra attention to the results of that breakout in our data table segments. So, without further ado, let's break into some of the results. Starting with our college choice trends document. And you can see here, I've pulled a quote to open each and every one of these sections. And this person said, I spent a lot of time reading stories about how school X has this and college Y has that. But what really changed was when I found the videos for the college they picked. And it actually showed those things, and like the people who used them, that changed my list a lot. So this person clearly did some information seeking. They found a source of information that they trusted, and it had storytelling infused in a way that really changed their mind about something. So those are going to be kind of some consistent threads as we pull through some of the data that we found in this section and in our later reports. So first, every time we run this study, we ask about college selection factors. This is something that we have done a long, long time. And so in the larger document, you can actually see some of the year-over-year trends of this. For here, however, I'm just presenting the differences between graduating seniors, that's in your gold bar, rising students in the red bar, and your parents in the gray bar. That's primarily because the year-over-year changes weren't that interesting this year. They didn't change a whole lot among our graduating seniors. But if you look at this, you can definitely see some pretty big differences across our different audiences, like degree options being so much more important for our rising students than just our graduating seniors. Our graduating seniors had a little bit more concern about location, for example. They are kind of leading that different area. And your parents, campus safety, of course, that broke into the top four for parents, comparative to the amounts that you see that from your graduating seniors and your rising students. So these were the top 15 factors. We actually look at 36 different factors in our study if you ever want to dive deeper into those. But one of the things I do often mention to folks is it's very easy to look at things near the top and say, that's all we need to talk about, and look at things near the bottom and say, well, that's not that important to very many people. But the way that we actually run this question means people are making some forced choices. They have to decide what's most important to them. And if a person passed up things like scholarships, tuition, degree options, location, all of these, and they picked something like course variety or campus diversity or some of the other things even further down on our list, that must be really important to them. So I always like to mention things at the top of the list, great for general strategies. Things near the bottom of this list for college factors are really great to show personalization in your outreach. When you realize something is really important to a person, being able to reinforce some of that in their communication will make them feel heard, which is always so important there. So that's college selection factors. As I mentioned, year over year for graduating seniors hasn't really changed much in the selection factors that are most important. What has changed a bit is our information seeking. So here the different bars are actually indicative of different years, and this is specific to graduating seniors. So which of these different information sources are people using? And this is a select all that apply. And that's really important because it means now we can actually see that there are particular years where more information seeking happened than others. Specifically, that in 2025, information seeking was much higher across a lot of different categories, including email communications jumping up, and we'll talk a little more about that in a bit. More people using the college's own websites, more reliance on friends and family, even mail-in publication. We got some old school breaking into this. And so generally, there was more information seeking in 2025. We can then see media use also had some changes. And so here we again have 2025, 2024, and 2023 results. And which of these platforms do you use on a regular basis? And I mentioned I would bring humble email back up into this conversation because 2025 saw just a flourish in use of email on a regular basis. This is something we're going to keep track of over the next few years because it might just be an oddball thing about 2025, but it could also indicate that audiences are starting to migrate back to email for some of this. For a while, we were seeing people migrate away from email as being a key source. But this really reinforces why things like the humble email are so important. You can also see, though, things like Instagram and Google search still very strong here, as well as YouTube being something that has risen in 2025. And so always be thinking about those different content streams that you're working on. Comparatively, there were some pretty big drop-offs in things like Snapchat and TikTok among graduating seniors. I know TikTok we've seen has had a pretty big retraction ever since there was all that kind of chatter about a TikTok ban. We can also see a huge rise in the use of ChatGPT and other AI tools. So that's a year over year increase, and we'll see some more of that in the AI results. So again, this doesn't mean that you should never spend any time talking about your institution on LinkedIn. It's just a level setter about how many people are really using that platform on a regular basis from your key audiences. And this is one where I would also recommend you look at the breakout between different audience groups. Parents versus students is always a really interesting one. Of course, Facebook being the classic example, see how many parents are still using it compared to their children. However, one thing I will mention here is that while we might think of, oh, these are certain platforms that parents just aren't on, they're still on a lot of these platforms that you might think of as platforms for younger people at a pretty high rate. I mean, we're talking 1 in 3 parents is on TikTok comparative to just, the 45% on the graduating seniors. List for YouTube, very similar. Google search, almost equal. So I know it's really easy to think about, oh, TikTok is just for outreach to students. It might not be. What you might need to think about is how your strategies for different audiences within the same platform might differ, but their platform use actually doesn't vary as much as we might expect in some cases. Of course, Facebook is a great extreme example of a space where they are a pretty big difference. One of the things that we tracked last year in 2024 was what was seemingly an ever-growing trust gap on social media. So, institutional content, how much do people trust it versus user-generated content? And so, institutional was in gold, user content in red. And you could see that from the point in 2019 to 2024, we had experienced this situation where it used to be trusted about the same, and now there's this very large gap. Well, the gap has gotten smaller, and so that's, I think, a really good sign for the industry generally. Some of that trust in higher education may be coming back a little bit. And I might also relate to some of our results that we found in the political perceptions section of all of our research as people start to distrust more and more of the content that is created organically from users. You can see there's just a slight dip in that perception right now. So our trust gap is actually shrinking. That's what we want. Generally, we want trust in institutional content continue to go up, and user content, that's an argument whether you want it to go up or down. But we definitely think that that gap is something that we want to continue to eliminate. So bravo industry, as you continue to work toward this. I hope we continue to see these trends in the way that people trust institutional content. We also asked questions about social media influencers. I thought this one was really interesting and the percentage of people who are using influencers. This dark green is the percentage of people who are following social media influencers who specifically make college content. 1 in 4 among your rising students, 1 in 5 among your graduating seniors. So there are influencers out there making college content. I think it has a pretty big impact on our current generations and the way they're seeing and understanding institutions. It helps them build schemas and expectations for your institutions. So something to think about as you're planning around your own strategy through influencing. You can also see that there's a pretty decent percentage of people who follow other types of influencers, but they don't necessarily make college content. One thing I will mention is that the percentages of this dark green and light green are actually likely a little bit higher than what they're presented here. And that's because in survey research, we often have something called social desirability bias. And this is one of those questions that we found people tend to downplay the fact that they are A, on certain types of social media, and B, following certain types of people, including social media influencers. So there is some evidence to suggest that these numbers are actually a little bit smaller than they might be in reality, as people kind of have a little bit of bias in their survey responses. And it could also be they just aren't clearly aware. So that's what these kind of yellow slices are. Percentage of people who say, I have no idea if I follow a an influencer. What does it even mean to be an influencer? Sometimes is the question you get out of that. If is that person who only has 1,000 followers who thinks they're an influencer? Is that person who has a lot of followers but isn't necessarily trying to influence people an influencer? All very good questions to consider as we think through kind of this phenomenon in the social media space. Let's move into politics and college perceptions. This was a great quote from a parent talking about how they got a letter from a dean who was protesting during the Gulf War, and that protecting that is just one of the most important roles of colleges. And so that ultimately led them to feel really good about the institution where they got that letter. Again, storytelling tethered throughout this and connection to other pieces. So, as I mentioned in our introduction, we actually did some studies last year about politics. At the start of the year, we did a study about how much it impacts people's likelihood to go to certain institutions. And later in the year, we talked about impacts of the election and the election results. So this year, when we ran this study, we were really interested to see have things changed since our post-election survey. And largely they have not. This is how important it is for a campus to have similar political views. You can see, regardless of our different groups here, there really hasn't been a whole lot of change other than non-political students has actually gone down pretty significantly. But generally speaking, most of these groups are about where they were right after the election. So, despite the fact that many things have happened since the election and lots of changes have occurred and more information has come out, it hasn't really changed the perception of whether or not a college campus should have kind of the political views of yourself. Similarly, it's not really impacting whether or not they would potentially or consider attending an institution in another state. There is, a 5% shift in people saying that state politics actually makes no difference. So, if anything, people are actually a little less focused on this than when we ran the study in the post-election space. So that's a bit of a surprise. Definitely interesting as we look through comparing this across our different demographic categories. Some of the things that were kind of new, and you can see here, college role in politics also didn't shift much, other than conservative parents feeling like colleges should be less involved in navigating political issues for students. But what's I think really interesting then is how that relates to some of the other questions that we had, which was about first the impact of the Trump administration. Do you believe that the changes they're trying to make are really going to be positive or negative for students at colleges and universities? You can see that generally our graduating seniors are rising students. I don't have in the chart here, but it's true there too. And our parents all typically agree that we've got, maybe a quarter to about a third of people seeing some type of net positive, and a lot of folks, the other two-thirds or three-quarters, in a net negative view of what's going on from the Trump administration. And so this was, of course, highly related to personal politics and different demographic factors. So I'd strongly recommend you look into some of that in the demographics breakout if you're curious about this. But what's really interesting is how that then reflects in the way that people really responded toward the way that Harvard responded, I used that term already, to the Trump administration and its requests. And this was a big story several months ago. It was much more relevant when we ran this survey as compared to today. A lot of things, again, have changed since then. But basically, the Harvard website had posted their response to the Trump administration about their requests. And we asked folks to read that response and then speak to their affinity toward it. Do they feel positive toward the way it was spoken about, negative toward it, and so forth? And you can see again the breakouts between audiences and their different political leanings. So, the negativity from conservative audiences, the positivity from your liberal audiences, not really a major surprise there, but perhaps ones to look at are those moderate and non-political groups and how there's a pretty solid positive affinity toward that. The reason I bring it up is because I get a lot of questions from clients of how much should they lean into politics and what your political affiliation as an institution is. And largely, we tend to recommend that it's not really something that you should talk about a ton unless that is, one of your big enrollment goals or something that you're targeting through your brand. That largely, if it's not a big part of your brand, it's not something you really need to talk about much. But what we have found is there is a little bit of power in recognizing for students and parents that you might be a supportive institution, regardless of their political things, and also to protect students. So, in the qualitative of this, we even had some strongly conservative parents say, I still felt positive about this because you can clearly see that the institution was trying to protect students. And that became more important to them than the political affiliation question. The next section that I want to talk about today is AI use in the college search. So if we just covered a section where not a lot has changed over time, we are now in the section where basically everything has changed over time. We continue to see this rise. And here's our story from this section. My teacher keeps telling me stories about how people wouldn't let him use the internet in school, and now we teach it. How important it is to learn about these things and how that could be similar with AI. And I think that's really an interesting thing to speak about from a student's perspective of like, am I going to need to take classes on this in the future? And probably I should. But the big picture, as far as how this is changing over time, can very easily be seen in this chart. This is again just for graduating seniors because we started asking this just a few years ago. And we asked, are you using it to search for information about colleges? So, specifically about colleges, that's the gold sliver. And you see it started at 3%, went to 10% last year, is now nearly a quarter of our respondents. Also, growing is, of course, then the group of people who have used it but are using it for other purposes. So, didn't grow from 2024 to 2025, but that's because it borrowed some of those folks, I think, to grow that golden slice there. And the shrinking of the people who say, I've just never used AI. It's far less common now among these groups. And we have breakouts for the other audience groups as well. One of the breakouts that I wanted to show you is about AI activity in schools. And I thought this was a really interesting breakout, not because the percentages surprised me that much, but because of the extreme difference across our audiences. This is our graduating seniors results. I mentioned earlier that you can find all of our demographic and institutional breakouts in our data tables. So this is an example of one of those data tables. So you can see across the top, all graduating seniors had about 24% of respondents saying that most students are using AI, which go back here. That's almost perfect. Right on. Good job, graduating seniors. Your perceptions match reality, hopefully. And so, one of these things here that you can kind of see is then the differences across your different demographic groups. So, which groups feel like they've seen that more or less often. Some of those institutional groups are really interesting as well. I also thought it was interesting that conservative versus liberal audiences have a little bit of differences there also. But my big picture of why I brought this in for graduating seniors, again, we've got about two-thirds of people saying that it's being used at least a pretty decent amount of time versus most students. When I go to the rising students, almost as much, very similar numbers. But when I go to the parents, this number drops off quite a bit. So now we're under 50% say that they're using it. And I think this is a really interesting, it's like a two-step process. Students have to realize it first, and eventually parents will catch on. This is a really good example of that kind of the lag between what students are hearing at their schools versus what parents are hearing about students at their schools. We also have a measure of affinity toward AI, and I only brought in the graduating seniors table here simply because the average scores across all of our audiences were almost exactly the same. You can see there are some differences based on some of the other breakouts we have, but largely most audience groups, large audience groups, end up at around a similar score to this, including other studies that we've been running, which is basically everyone split. Um, you can see here that we've got about 51% on the negative side to 49% on the positive side. And that is just kind of what we're seeing right now. A lot of people are somewhere in the middle, somewhere getting toward the middle. And so our average score is also very much toward the middle of a 6 point scale, which would be a 3.5. That negativity is around anxiety primarily. The positivity is about saving time, being innovative and the cutting edge. But I bring it here just because we might see the use continue to grow. But just because use is growing doesn't mean people are happy about the use growing in all cases, because this score hasn't really changed over the last few years. What has changed is the use. And so use is changing, but affinity is not. All right, last but certainly not least, personality and storytelling. And so I brought back the original quote. This was from that graduating senior in the first quote. And I did that because I wanted to kind of reinforce the fact that I put a storytelling element in all of the quotes I selected for these different categories, largely because personality and storytelling influences all of these different factors we've talked about so far. If you want to go back and look at something like affinity toward AI, and I just went there because it's the slide that's very easy for me to get to. If you look at something like this, there is a reality that you can impact a person's score on this scale by communicating with them a certain way. That's the whole reason why we send communication out to students, right? We want to move their opinions, move their perceptions across a scale like this. So if I was someone who was really big into AI and wanted every student to love I would be trying to figure out ways to communicate with them to move them higher up on this scale. Well, when we think about that, there are different ways you can do that, but the best way to do it by far is through personality and storytelling. And that's why we brought it out as our final report. And I hope you all read it and really enjoy the last report in our series. But the key idea, the thesis here is this: stories create memory. And there's a lot of reasons behind that. We'll talk about some of the neuroscience in just a moment, but you create these memories. And when you have memories, that's what leads to action and behavioral change, because those are the things that come up when you are trying to make a decision. And the reality, though, is that a lot of our respondents to our survey didn't hear good stories. Some of these quotes. Most of the stories are the same. It's kind of boring and they think it's some big thing. But okay, you have a library like every other school. Cool. I, I don't know if I can really read that in the rising student respondent voice, but I just remember reading this quote and thinking, yeah, I could definitely see like a sophomore in high school saying that. Um, Overall, when we think about this idea of storytelling, what we're really trying to do is set up those memories and creating great memories so we get those behavioral changes. The way that works is through some fun neuroscience things, which is all about our schemas for understanding a concept. So, a schema is kind of like a blueprint. How do you associate different terms with things in your brain? And I'm not a neuroscientist, so if the neuroscientist people want to get into the actual science behind why this works, that would be great. But from a communication science perspective, we use the idea of schemas to understand whether or not people have a good expectation about something and what those expectations are. In our survey, we actually asked an open-ended question about the first things that come to mind when someone says college. And here are some of those. And I kind of grouped them together. There's people thinking about what college leads to. There are things about the kind of personal growth experience in college. There are the nuts and bolts of the academics. There's cost, of course. People are worried about those. They're also thinking about experiences. And so these are some of the things that are typically connected to college in our brains. These are the schemas like, oh, it's expensive. I need to pay tuition. Hopefully, I get a scholarship. Those are kind of the trains of thought that run through people's minds. And if we create really great storytelling, maybe we can impact this schema, not necessarily just about colleges in general, but about your college or university. If you tell really compelling stories in a consistent and personality driven way, we believe you can create a individualized and differentiated schema about your institution in the mind of a student. Now, our summer research document goes into great depth about our archetyping system, which is a way you can measure personality in storytelling. I don't want to get into that because we have other webinars about it. You can read about it in the report, and it would probably take me another hour to talk about archetypes. But all you need to know is that archetypes are a color coding system we use that indicates different personality or personas you can take on when you're telling a story. Are you telling that story through the lens of personality? And the results on this page here are really quite telling in how that really impacts the way people respond to your messages. In our study, we created 10 different messages, and some of those messages had our archetype-based personality infused into them. So those messages spoke to a particular archetype through a personality lens. We also had a message that did not. It was just fact driven. It lived in fact land. It was just talking without any real emotion or personality. And we asked people to score these. And what you can see here is our acceptance scores of a blue message versus the other types of archetype messages versus our beige or non-archetyped message. So you can see right away the non-archetype message scored the lowest. Well, what are we indicating on the left to right axis here, the x-axis? Well, that is actually the respondents' amount of the blue archetype in their own personality. So this adds that complexity of it is there's the personality that you're sending and the personality of the person reading your content. And lo and behold, if you create content that resonates with their personality, as people were more blue of the archetype in their own personality, they scored a blue lens message about college higher. You can see that left to right. The other archetype-driven messages, they liked them. They went well, regardless of the level of blue in their personality. And they liked all of the archetype-driven messages more than the non-personal and personality-driven messages. That's the core concept here. As you infuse personality, you are at least getting one step above the beige messaging. And even better, if you can start to understand who has certain personality types, then you can even offer them segmented, individualized communications so that the people who are really high on particular archetypes and their personality is one way, you're sending them really great personality-driven messaging that resonates with them, segmented from other audiences who have different personalities. We do that all through a process called DARTS and our psychographic segmentation. If you're ever interested in that, please come talk to us. I absolutely love doing psychographic-based segmentation of messaging. I think it's one of the best ways that you can make your institution stand out from a storytelling perspective. And when you do that, hopefully, again, we can change the schema that people have about your college. Not only are they thinking about tuition, but now they're thinking about it as a return on investment. And they know that your school is going to give them nice support in their scholarships. So these are, again, kind of color coded towards some of our archetypes. This is not to say this is the only way you could color code them. I just wanted to give an example. If an institution is telling their story really consistently and really from a personalized lens, it isn't going to mean that they somehow completely think of college differently. These are the same buckets we had before. These are some of the exact same concepts we had before. But now what you can see is they're a little bit closer together. Some of them are personified. Some of them have changed as far as what words we're using. Like I said, it's no longer college is expensive, but college has a return on investment. And that's connected here to the blue archetype. So we were talking through that potential blue lens. So there are a lot of different ways that if you are doing this consistent personalized communication, you can help influence these types of schemas in the minds of your audiences. That's what I have here for you today. Emotion is the driver, storytelling is the tool, but also we have had a great season of research. So the last thing I'll leave you with is kind of a personal question, but also something to consider as you close out of this webinar and close out of reading our research series. Did you like the summer research series? Should we keep doing it this way where we're sending you small topics? Would you prefer instead to just get one giant report of all the topics later in the year? We tried to do this so we could get you more kind of over time. So let me know. Feel free to get in touch with me about this series. Also, connect with me if you have other ideas. I do know that one of the key things that we're trying to do in the next few years is to start to capture other types of audiences. Most of what we've done in the past has been traditional undergraduate. We want to look at graduate, online, adult education, certificates. We want to look at other areas in the kind of higher education space. So that is one thing we are already underway with in some of our research and studies for the national space. The other thing that I would love to hear from you, though, is what are some of the topics that you need to hear about? We picked politics, AI, and personality this year. Those might not be the big topics of next year. And so if you're thinking about, wow, I would really love if someone did national research on XYZ topic, please get in touch. My information is here. It's also on the last slide. And I really appreciate your time here with us in our webinar today. And if you've been reading through our summer research series all summer long, really appreciate your time on that and would love to chat with you. So have a great rest of your day and good luck as students start coming back onto campus and have a good one.